here we are now at number 17 for our deep dives, and we're having to backtrack a little bit because we didn't do our due diligence and we missed the
We forgot.
We missed the Montreal Expos and the Washington Nationals somehow. I'm not really sure how we managed that, but we did.
They're a one-time champion, so we're up to the threes now, as we started last time.
We're got to go back to the ones.
So we're going to go back, and then we'll go back to the threes after this again. But yes, only one World Series championship for the team. That was the first team to play a game outside of the United States as a Major League team.
Right. And that's a big deal. It was the first time, the Major League Baseball could claim it was going international, even though I think most people really wouldn't look at it that way. I mean, even if it's
I don't know about that. I felt that way. So what do I remember about this? So the reason they were called the Expos is because there was a fair, or whatever you call it, like a carnival fair in Montreal in 1967.
The Montreal Expo.
It was Expo 67. It was a big deal. It was like, I was a little kid, but you knew about it, even not being from there. And so somehow they decided that they would name the team the Montreal Expos when it had something to do with something that happened 2 years before. I thought it was strange then. I don't really know why they did that, but that was the name of that franchise, and they have played more there than they have in Washington.
Yeah, just because of when they came into the league. I mean, they've only been in Washington 20-something.
No, from 2005, so 18 years.
They're not even there 20 years.
Right.
No, but I think it's interesting because they named it after them, and I think even though they've had arguably more success as the Nationals just because they've got that World Series ring, even if they've been kind of bad outside of that little stretch there for most of their national history. I think the Nationals, because they have that World Series ring, kind of come in higher than the Expos in terms of where they where they've brought the franchise.
Romantic in me wants to say no, you're wrong, but you're right. And I feel bad because the Expos only made the playoffs one time in 1981, and not only was it that one time, that was the strike year. So there was a first half and a second half.
Okay, so yeah, that was something I had kind of discovered here in my research. They only made the playoffs once, and in a strike year. So you're going to have a really hard time selling me on the greatness of the Montreal baseball here.
And I guess it's because, I was a little kid, so I went to the first game the Montreal Expos ever played. It was played at Shea Stadium, of course. So that was the year that they went to divisional play. So 1969, obviously, expansion, the Padres and the Expos. And I remember hating this Mac Jones on the Montreal Expos. Now, I'm about to turn 10 years old, and Mac Jones had a good day. He had a home run. He had hit, and the Expos beat the Mets 11-10. The Mets had an 11-6 lead, I think, going into the last inning. They scored 4 runs, not quite enough.
And so that was enough to cast the Expos forever in your mind as the evil empire.
The first game of the season was over. We're going to lose. Did we know? How little did we know?
Yes, and of course, that was the year of the Miracle Mets, so maybe that was the magic you needed to get it started.
And so the Mets had finished last, obviously, virtually every year except for 1 year when they finished 9th. So when they lost the first game of the season to the expansion Expos, they said, well, here we go. We're not even as good
as the new
expansion team.
Yeah,
so
it must have been really rough.
It was really sad. So the Nationals, and I guess we could have had Adam Korngold come on because we know that Adam's a big Washington National fan, and maybe he could have told us, how do National fans connect the Nationals to the Expos?
I think this is something that only older baseball fans are really concerned with. Do the fans of the Nationals care about their Expo heritage? I doubt it. Why would they really care?
So in that sense, would you say, if you had to talk about the greatest players in national history, you would not talk about the Expos at all and only talk about the 19 years of national baseball?
Right. It would be really confusing if you were doing the Milwaukee Brewers and you needed to throw in one season from the Seattle Pilots that
what
some guy
a season
had.
it was.
Right. It's nobody there that's a the problem I have with it is that is part of the franchise's history as an entity. But there are very, very few fans that went from watching the Montreal Expos to then watching the Washington Nationals and being diehard National fans. There are some. I'm not saying there aren't any. I am sure there are some. But if I had to guess, I would guess at least 85% of the Washington National fan base is composed of people who don't even think about the Expos. I bet a lot of them don't even know they were a team.
Well, when you go to the baseball reference page, right, and you look at the Washington Nationals, right, because that's how they do it. They don't sort them by the Expos. You'll see the Expos in there. And by the way, they had the same winning percentage as the Expos or Nationals 484. Doesn't matter. The same exact winning percentage, independent
Add
of
them
where
in
they
or
went.
separate
Didn't
them.
matter where they am. So that they would look at the Expos as saying, like, yeah, Gary Carter, boy, he's the franchise's greatest player.
Right.
What?
Why would they care? Like if you're an 18-year-old kid that's watched the Nationals your entire life, why would you care?
You have no connection to Tim Raines or Andre Dawson.
Right.
Or,
You've never seen them play. You've never seen them wear a national uniform. It's just not the same. And I think also because that wasn't a franchise that carried over. That was a completely new team that went into Washington. It wasn't like you took...
No.
It was an expansion team.
No. The Expos moved to Washington.
I thought it was... I thought they sheltered and then went into expansion.
Nope. There are lots of Expos who were Nationals in their first seasons.
Okay, my mistake.
So yes. So they moved there, and so like is Ryan Zimmerman the greatest National ever? Maybe he is. Maybe Max Scherzer is. I don't know.
Right, you'd probably. If I had to pick one, I'd probably pick Scherzer.
Yeah,
just
I
because
probably would too.
He achieved an overall higher peak with the Nationals than anybody. He was there for the World Series,
and he was there longer than he was with any other team. I didn't realize that Max, by the way, who's played I think 15 major league seasons, played 7 for Washington.
He played half his career for
almost
Washington.
half. Didn't play that anywhere else. Usually when you have a Hall of Fame player, he doesn't move around that much.
Right. Well, I think that's just more so
the current baseball.
More so current baseball. I think part of the reason why Hall of Fame players didn't move around a lot is we didn't have free agency for the longest time, and then you certainly weren't letting those guys hit free agency.
So, but when you talk about the franchise, you're going to have to include at least where the Expos,
If
where
you're going to
they
talk
played.
about the franchise, it's actually a really short list if you only talk about the Nationals.
19 years of the Nationals.
There's not a lot of amazing all-time players if you're just doing only them. And it gets a lot more interesting if you get to add in guys like Pedro and Vlad Guerrero, the Larry Walker Expo years. You got to add in Tim Raines. There's a lot of really good players that played for the Expos. Gary Carter they weren't very good.
There's a lot of good players that played for the Expos that were outfielders in particular, which I think is really interesting.
There's a legacy there in the outfield.
Yeah, Hall of Fame out, as you've already mentioned, quite a few of them. So I think that that's a little bit different for that franchise. And they never seemed, as the Expos, as we said, to sort of get to the point where they were a threat. The one year that they were good, like I said, they had the split season, so they had to win the second half to get in the playoffs, and they lost in the most horrible way in the National League Championship Series. So they lost in the Game 5 of the NLCS, a home run by Rick Monday of the Dodgers in the top of the 9th inning, pushed the Dodgers to the World Series, which they actually ended up winning as well.
The Expos, at least they got to the playoffs that one year. I mean, imagine if they didn't make it that one year. That would be a true legacy.
Right,
utility.
from 1969 to 2005. So let's see, that's 46
years.
Yeah, 36 years. 36 years. One playoff appearance. Wow,
that's not good.
So and they lost the team because they stopped going, and now we're talking about a franchise going back to Montreal, which you have sort of railed against a little bit.
Which I have a hard time understanding because it's like, let's go back to Montreal because we left there last time because it was so bad nobody liked it. Man, you need to sell me on the.
There's a lot of big baseball fans in Montreal. They just don't go to the games.
Yeah. It's so hard for me. Like, no, there's tons of people there. They just didn't show up last time.
And you could say that the Expos enabled the Blue Jays, right? Because at the time, I guess they considered it to be a success.
And the greater Toronto area is a much bigger area.
Much bigger.
And I will also say this, it is a much more Americanized area
English-speaking,
than Montreal.
certainly, yes.
Montreal is still very, very French-Canadian. It's not the same as the Toronto area. And to try and just consider them as the same because they're both Canadian, it's like being like, oh yeah, those people in Ohio are just like those people in California.
I overheard Dave Metter talking on a podcast, Cooperstown Dave, who's been on our podcast, about an Expos announcer, and I'm not going to remember the guy's name. I should have remembered his name. And he was famous for making French expressions out of baseball that didn't really exist in French, to make people understand what he was trying to say. So he sort of coined a bunch of phrases in French that are still being used because it never had happened before.
Exactly. So I think there's a lot of interesting history to the Expo franchise because they were north of the border, because they were never a particularly great team. I think a lot of it sort of gets wrapped up in this lovable loser sort of, like they take on a similar sort of identity the Cubs
Yeah,
in my mind.
I don't know if I felt that way watching. You're right in that that's what happened.
Right, but I'm talking about the way people look back on them now. People look back on the Expos almost like they were kind of quaint.
Yes, I think that's true. Well, the first ballpark they played in was Jari Park, which was a strange ballpark, and they were not able to. They had to sort of make it work. I think it was a AAA park before that, and then they moved to the stadium for the Olympics, Olympic Stadium, which was a turf stadium, and it was domed. So that's really good for Montreal because people hated going to Jari Park because it was like 20 degrees in June.
Right, and the players were like, yeah, we're not doing this for seasons on end.
So there are a lot of quaint stories that come out of those early years in going to Montreal to play Major League games. I remember the Montreal Royals, Jackie Robinson came through. That was a Dodger AAA franchise. So there was baseball there for a long time.
There was baseball, but the expectation there, and certainly as you moved into the 90s and the 2000s would be totally different. And, compared to when it was a AAA park back in the 40s, the 50s, into the 60s, okay, that's one thing. But now you've got major league teams flying into play there. They're not going to put up with the same things that the AAA players will put up with because the AAA players will put up with anything because they just want to keep playing baseball.
And you made such a good point about how, Toronto is so much more population than Montreal. So I don't know, again, why they decided Montreal is the place, like how that came about. I wasn't really paying attention to what was going on at that point.
I think there were the ownership really was lobbying for it. And as a place that was, you had a group of people, you had already had a successful AAA stadium there. So it was much easier upgrading from that to go from the AAA to the Major League franchise than to build something from the ground up in Toronto, when there's not a legacy of baseball in that country in the same way.
They did, right. You had that in Montreal. I mean, there was a romance about that Montreal Royals team and all that stuff. We want a major league team. We want a real team. And so you think about the idea of doing it. And I remember what they said about the Kings. I've told you about when the Kings moved into Southern California back in the 60s in hockey. And everybody said there are 700,000 Canadians living in Southern California. And then somebody quipped, yeah, but the reason they left Canada is they all hate hockey.
Yeah.
So the Montreal couldn't draw because the people didn't quite love it, enough, even with a ballpark that allowed them not to freeze their butts off when they went to watch the game.
Now, I will say, having a franchise history that is literally just futility for the most part isn't exactly going to help you grow a big, healthy fan base. People want to watch a team that's good, and when you're basically bad every season, people are going to get bored. It's not very entertaining watching a team that never has a chance.
Another good point you make, because I think about the teams after the 1981 Expos that made that. I can't think of any notable Expo team. You're talking about 23 years.
Yeah, they had some notable players. Vlad came through.
We'll talk about those guys.
Pedro came through. But, it was one or two guys on the team that would make it for a season, and that was it. You weren't looking, and those guys had to go elsewhere to achieve postseason success. So I think that really hurts in terms of your ability to develop a fan base. And you've seen that in Washington, where Washington struggled with a fan base, and then they got good. They won a World Series, and now they have a positive, thriving fan base.
Well, and when they brought the Expos to Washington for the 2005 season, Washington had been complaining about not having a team ever since the Senators moved to Texas in the early 70s. So that's 30 years that without a team. They felt like, there was a tradition, obviously, of baseball in Washington. We got the president going back to President Taft throwing out the first pitch and stuff like that.
If it's the American pastime, it kind of makes sense that America's capital should have a team.
So why the Washington couldn't support a team all of a sudden, aside from being terrible, the Senators, and all that stuff, both incarnations of them, by the way.
Well, I think there's probably a long time where the idea of getting in and out of D.C. to play baseball was nobody likes going to D.C. It's a nightmare to navigate.
But the Nationals, once they got, they were pretty good within the first 7 or 8 years that they moved there, right? They had those playoff runs in the early 2010s.
Right, exactly. They came up, they started having success, and that's what helps build a fan base. People want to root for a team that's fun to watch.
And then I remember when they did this, they got Steven Strasburg. That to me was franchise changing for things. Everybody knew about this guy. You knew him. I thought it
was more Harper.
Well, that was after that even.
Right. But Harper was the beginning of we're here for real now.
Okay, yeah. But I think Strasburg changed wow, this is a serious franchise. This guy is really good.
Well, now they have a top of Major League Baseball level talent on their team, which is something that they hadn't had since probably Vlad or Pedro left. I can't remember which one left first.
I like that you mention Pedro all the time because a lot of people forget that Pedro was a Montreal Expo.
Well, I think of him as a pretty, because he pitched for Montreal for a long time. Yes, he came over and had a bunch of years with Boston, but it wasn't like he was in Montreal for at least 5 or 6 years.
He was a Dodger actually at the very beginning. He and his brother were Ramon were on the Dodgers. So yeah, and you mentioned other guys. I mentioned Ivan Rodriguez started his career as a national,
right? But he was not there particularly,
and he wasn't very good, at the beginning. But the fact that he started there, I thought was really interesting because I completely forget that he came up as a national.
Right. But there's a certain level where it's just like, okay, that's less of an interesting fact and more of a nice thing for immaculate grid.
Well, yeah, as a matter of fact, you might be
like, okay, I'm sure we just helped everybody out. You now know Ivan Rodriguez was a Montreal Expo at one point.
So do we want to go
and a Washington National?
And a Washington National. Do you want to talk about the players at positions? Do you want to talk about the best WAR players?
I think let's talk about the best WAR players for Montreal, just because I think it's interesting when you're looking at them that they actually they're all Expo players.
The first 4,
right? It's very interesting when you look at that. Now, I think that's a large part because you've just had more years for guys to put up WAR,
right?
Right, and so it's not necessarily that the Expo players were better. It's just that when you have 30+ years of history, there's more opportunities for guys to accumulate career WAR for you compared to the Nationals, which has only had this 18-year window, and you had to get a guy that started his career right at the beginning of it for them, so it would be ending around now.
And in the top 10, they are at, I think, 7 of them.
So if I had to guess, number 1, Andre Dawson?
I would have thought the same thing. It actually is Gary Carter.
It's Gary Carter,
right?
Wow, okay.
And I always, as a Met fan, we always think Gary is ours. We knew he was in
I think of it as sort of 50-50, so I'm surprised he
played more years in Montreal than he did for the Mets.
Wow, okay.
So, and he was a better player in Montreal than he was as a baseball player, as a pure baseball. He was younger, his knees weren't bad, and he could do it all as a catcher.
That's why he went in as an Expo, right?
He went in as an Expo. And Dawson is 3rd.
Really? So 2nd would be Raines?
Yeah, that is correct. Very good. Okay. And the 4th guy, so here's the weird thing about a team that never was any good. A guy who pitched there for a really long time, was a really good, pitcher for them, but no one will ever hear Steve Rogers.
Captain America?
Yeah, there you go. And that's the problem. So
pitching for Montreal Expos.
You speak to an Expo fan, and they'll tell you all you want about Steve Rogers and how good he was on teams that never won.
Right.
So
and it's tough when you're a pitcher, and that's your legacy is that you were the best pitcher on a shitty team.
Yeah. I think he had like 44 WAR for a bad team.
Right. Which is you look at a guy like who we talked about in our last deep dive with Steve Carlton, who kind of was able to escape that fate because he was able to help lead those Philly teams to some championship. So he wasn't remembered as just the amazing Philly pitcher on a string of bad Philly teams.
And he also, I don't think Steve Rogers pitched for any other team but the Expos. Carlton obviously pitched for the Cardinals as well. So Max Scherzer though is next
4.
on number 5.
He beats out Zimmerman.
Right, he beats out Zimmerman, and I think Zimmerman is like Mr. National.
Right, like Zimmerman would be up there because in my mind he would be like the first national compiler. So I think he was a better player than to call him just a compiler. Didn't he get an MVP?
No, he did not get an MVP.
He got close one year.
But I will say that Zimmerman was probably at 40 WAR for his career.
Right. I don't like calling a guy with 40 WAR a compiler.
No, he's not. He had a 116 career ops plus.
Pretty,
that's good.
That's
and he
solid.
was an excellent fielder.
Right.
And he's Mr. Nat because he did what I really like about a guy. He played 16 years in the major leagues, and he played them all for the Nationals. And so what I didn't want to have happen was, we're going to do a podcast about the guys that played 1 year someplace else after
that could
18 years.
Yeah, like Joey Votto could be that kind of guy this season. He could sign a 1-year contract. Like I could see him ending up in Baltimore really easily.
And I said before, it's like I understand why the guy will do it, but there's a part of me when I look at his BR page, I just want to see all the same team, but that doesn't happen anymore, like at least the way that it did before. Though you know what, it happened before too. Guys did the same thing.
It did happen.
Someone's going to pay him; they're going to go play. And
right.
If 44 years old, you'll take the money. That's
and it's your chance to go play in the playoffs and try and get a World Series ring.
So we talked recently about a third baseman for them, and you went and you looked his stats up, Tim Wallach.
Right.
And you went, whoa, he's next on the list, ahead of Vlad Guerrero Jr. And that really surprised me. It makes me think that Vlad Guerrero Jr., Senior had more WAR for the Angels than I thought.
Probably. I think he didn't play for the. I think he played for the Expos for less time than you think. I think it was only 5 or 6 years.
8 years.
8 years. Okay. Wow.
8 years. And he had great stats for the Expos. So I guess I don't know why he would be so low on the WAR list.
Right. How much career WAR does he have?
With Montreal?
Just in general.
59.5.
Okay,
so he has 40 of that or so with them, which you would think it would be higher than 40.
You think it would have higher than 60?
Actually, no, that's not.
He's a 5-year WAR player. That's pretty good. It's just he only played 8 seasons.
And I think he got hurt a bunch then too. That would hurt his cumulative WAR,
right?
Even if his effectiveness was still really good. So that's my bad. And then Strasburg is there ahead of Rendon, and Rendon, that tells you a lot about
right. When Rendon is like 8th or 9th to 10, you're going to start seeing a real drop off now in between just guys that were good players that just happened to come through the franchise for a few years and guys that just played a bunch of years for the team. That's kind of what we're going to be down to at this point on the list.
The greatest Nicaraguan pitcher of all time, Dennis Martinez, who was nicknamed by one of his teammates El Presidente. I could never figure out and I thought it had some meaning. No, I don't think it had any meaning at all. The guy just started calling him El Presidente because he was from Nicaragua or something. Like
probably.
Really good pitcher. Guy, 200 career wins. Excellent pitcher.
Came through Montreal at one point.
Yes, he was there for a long time. I think he pitched 7 or 8 years for Montreal, and he also pitched for the Orioles for a while. 8 years for Montreal, 11 years for the Orioles. This was a really, really good pitcher.
Yeah.
And the rest of the guys, you got Bryce Harper, who was higher in your. He's 27 WAR for the Nationals. That's pretty good. It's pretty good.
It's pretty good. It seems low too. I'm kind of surprised it's only 27.
So, yes, I think so too. So the rest of the guys are guys you wouldn't necessarily know. I think it might be more interesting to talk a little bit about the best players at each position for the Nationals. And I had no problem at catcher.
Well, catcher is kind of easy.
And so, and I try to come up a lot of times with a second place guy.
Right. But like, I feel like a lot of times when we get into these second place guys, it's us trying to be really nice and name some guy that like.
Well, so I actually know another catcher that played for the Nationals.
Right.
So Gary Carter and then Wilson Ramos would probably be the guy. If you look at his time with the Nationals, he was very good with them.
Right, but like
doesn't approach Gary Carter.
Exactly. It's not really a fair comparison to be like, oh yeah, Gary Carter and Wilson Ramos are like the best 2 catchers of national history. They put up a combined 68 WAR, and 66 of it is Gary Carter. It's kind of misleading.
But as a Met fan, if you had to put a first and a second place player for each position, you could do it easily.
Well, for the Mets, yes.
Well, so anybody.
I think there would be positions where it's like you would have one guy. Like I would have David Wright at third, and there's really nobody that I could say can kind of come in second fairly to that because it's David Wright and a bunch of nobodies.
You've uncovered the Mets' age-old third base problem, as a matter of fact.
I could go one position over. We go to shortstop. You've got Francisco Lindor and then
Jose Reyes.
Jose Reyes is
okay. So I wouldn't say. I think the point is there's more guys, and it's funny that you're talking about that because only guy I could really come up with the first base was Andres Galarraga. Really good player for the Expos. You probably knew him more as a Rocky. After that, but just very, very good. And Zimmerman played some first base, but I have him at third for this.
Right, he would go at third for this.
Adam LaRoche, Tony Perez. There are no other guys.
Right, like when you're having to throw out names like that, you're just throwing out names because we want to be like, look, we were able to get 2 for every position.
And then you mentioned the Mets' third base problem. Well, the Expos, they had a second base problem.
A second base problem?
Yes. So the number 1 second base, I had to go through and say, like, who would I pick? So the way I do it is I look at who was the opening day second baseman for them and all that. And so Jose Vidro. Have you ever heard of Jose Vidro?
I've heard of Jose Vidro.
He was a okay defender on a good day, you being nice and all that. Good offensive second baseman, was the starting second baseman opening day for like 5 or 6 years. And then there's nobody else really.
So they never had a good second baseman.
Delino DeShields.
Yeah, you're really you're reaching.
I was digging. So at shortstop, were it not for Trey Turner.
Right, and that doesn't even really feel fair to.
You know what? He had a lot of WAR when he
True.
was there, so he was statting big time. And I put him over Ian Desmond.
Yeah, okay, that's. I'd rather have.
And a number 1 draft pick. It's Chris Spire, who you would never even heard of, but Chris Spire was a good major league shortstop.
Third base, you get Zimmerman.
Zimmerman over Wallach, because Wallach was a legit
good player.
candidate.
Those are 2 good. That's probably the.
We don't put Anthony Rendon there, but at least you've got 3 guys.
That's the first position where you could say they've had 3 guys where those were high quality baseball players.
Agreed. Good point. And here's a tough one. So I'm just who do you put against who? So I put Tim Raines over Larry Walker
In right field or left field?
I'm kind of doing outfield because it's really too hard to do it.
Right. But I mean, you immediately could go have Tim Raines, Andre Dawson,
Vlad Guerrero. So those 3 are
Larry Walker.
Well, Larry Walker, I had it as I think he only played 4 years for Montreal.
So you would kind of drop him off. I think your all-time 3 outfielders would be Dawson, Raines, Vlad.
That's a
great.
That's like historically good.
Right. Very few teams would be able to boast an outfield that strong.
And I put Bryce Harper in there as unfortunately, he ain't even going to move up on that list.
In there, yeah. And then so you'd probably have Steve Rogers and Pedro as the pitchers, right?
I have Scherzer and Steve Rogers.
Right. I'm thinking 2 Expo based. You're right. It would be Scherzer.
Strasburg, I would have said, but certainly Scherzer as number 1. I thought Jordan Zimmerman was a real good pitcher. I wouldn't have had him as the best all time.
Right. I would put Strasburg. I would put Scherzer. I don't know. I didn't know Steve Rogers before we started looking into this, but I would even put him over Jordan Zimmerman.
So, and when you look at the closer, maybe they have a closer problem too. So, former Met and Twin Jeff Reardon has 300 career saves, and he got a bunch of those with Montreal. So he gets the nod as the number 1 guy over Uget Urbina.
Yeah,
remember Ugi Urbina?
I do remember Urbina.
So, and I had trouble finding you think about the more recent closers and stuff like that. Sean Doolittle.
They're never good.
Brad Hand.
I remember beating national.
Who are the national closers over the years? They don't really.
Blake Triernan.
Training, yeah. He ended up on the Dodgers doing better there than he did for the Nationals. So, manager wise, Felipe Alou is the winningest manager with a losing record in Expos history.
The guy with a grand total of 1 playoff appearance?
1 playoff appearance. And I think Felipe Alou should be in the Hall of Fame as a Rule B candidate separately because he was a good player, did a lot for the game.
Was one of the managers that managed Major League Baseball.
And was one of the Alou brothers. But Davey Martinez, I guess, he won a World Series, so should he get some cred for that?
Unfortunately, the managers of the Expos kind of just they're some of the managers of all time. You really can't say oh yeah, they really had a great one there. They just they're a baseball team, so they've had managers.
Right. So I think the Nationals have a Washington identity. Your point is that have really little to do with the Expos unless you're looking up franchise history stats.
I think that's kind of how I look at it with these split teams. If the Yankees moved to the Yankees moved to Oklahoma City tomorrow, would Yankee fans follow that team?
Yes.
You think so?
For a little while. Well, I think this is a whole nother episode we could talk about because you think about the A's now moving to Vegas, and they have gone from Philadelphia to Kansas City to Oakland, now to Vegas.
That's going to be that team's going to have no fan base.
Right, like how do you remember those Philadelphia A's of the 19? No,
because it's think about that team moving into Las Vegas is a terrible team right now moving into Las Vegas. So you're not going to hold on to any of the old fans because Oakland fans are mad as hell about what's going on. So they're not going to watch. People in Vegas are going to go, oh, you want us to show up in the middle of summer to a AAA stadium to watch a terrible baseball team. Yeah, that's not going to happen.
They're only playing some of their games, right?
They're also going to play some of their games in San Francisco.
Yeah.
Right. So it's who's going to go to these games? Who's going to be a fan of the Las Vegas A's? Well, the Golden Knights got away with it only because they were good, but they're going to be a nightmare.
I think part of it is, and we won't get off on too much of a tangent here, is that there's a thought in Vegas that it's actually the transients that go to the games. So people that are coming into Vegas for the weekend, they'll go to an A's game.
I'm just saying,
like that.
I just can't imagine it's a particularly great business proposal to go, yeah, no, all other teams' fans are going to make us all our money. Because that's what you're saying.
Well, and in Vegas, it's always been about the gambling, and so now it's more about just the full entertainment. So you're not. It doesn't seem like the force is on to keep people in the casino. If this would have never happened 50 years ago, like if you're not gambling, go someplace else.
Right, but how are you going to sell the entertainment package when you're not going to have your own stadium for 3+ years?
So so the Nationals, I think, have a rough future ahead of them in the short term. I think they're getting their stuff together a little bit. Finally,
they were better.
now.
They were peskier this year than they imagined. They're stuck playing in a good NL East division, which is going to be tough because you could argue that you got 4 teams with playoff aspirations next year, plus the Nationals, who would say, "Hey, things break right for us. We're a playoff aspirational team too." I don't think they'll actually make it, but I think if you're a Nat fan, you'd be thinking, yeah, if everything breaks right for us, the young kids keep coming along, why couldn't we make a run at a wild card spot? Why couldn't we be in Arizona?
I'm happy that they decided to finally be smart and keep Mike Rizzo as GM, who's done a terrific job there, and also to keep Davey Martinez around. I think he's a great manager.
Right. You're in the very scary part as a baseball fan where you're just being like, you know what? We have to hope the young kids develop, and sometimes they do, and sometimes they don't.
Or sometimes they end up like Strasburg, where you paid him a ton of money,
and then he's just hurt.
That's not anybody's fault,
right.
But your money's tied up there for a franchise that's had a lot of ownership. Sort of, what are we doing? Are we selling the franchise?
Where are we go?
They're still in that kind of stuff, but they haven't really resolved that.
But I am sure they're much happier to be in that and not be thinking about giving Juan Soto a contract extension right now.
Yeah, they wouldn't.
Right, they would be. If they had called that bluff, if they hadn't dealt Soto, they would be in such a bad position right now.
The ballpark's nice. I haven't been there. I haven't been to Nats Park, and we pass it when we drive down past it. I always think, I would like to go to a game there. They actually played at a place you went to see a football game at. RFK Stadium was before that. It was a baseball stadium when they first moved to Washington, and we mentioned a couple of parks in Montreal. So, one World Series, but only in 19 years since they went to Washington. I think if I were a Nationals fan, that's how I could look at it.
Yeah, not a lot of teams can boast that.